The great crystal hall of the Galactic Council stretched high above the assembled delegates. Hundreds of different alien species filled the curved seats, their voices creating a buzz of different languages and sounds. Ambassador Veltar stood at the center podium, his tall blue form commanding attention as he called for order. The 847th session will now begin, Veltar announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. His four eyes swept across the crowd, noting the familiar faces and empty spaces. One seat had remained empty for over 200 years, the spot reserved for Earth's representative. Secretary Mordak shuffled through his electronic files, his 6 arms moving in perfect coordination. The small gray alien had served the Council for 3 centuries and had seen many species come and go. But Earth was different. They had simply stopped coming. First item on today's agenda, Mordak called out, the ongoing situation in the Kelfian border region. The discussion that followed was typical: trade disputes, mining rights, and territorial claims. The same arguments that had been happening for thousands of years. But as the day wore on, more delegates began bringing up the same concern. The silent sector. That was what they called the region of space where Earth's solar system sat. No ships went in. No messages came out. It had been that way since humanity sent their last communication to the Council. We respectfully declined further participation. The message had said, "Do not send envoys." Ambassador Corthan of the Hegemony raised his massive arm to speak. The bear-like creature's voice rumbled through the chamber. How long will we ignore the obvious threat? A species that cuts all contact is planning something dangerous. Veltar nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing for decades. What do you propose? Send a fleet, Corthan replied. Find out what the humans are hiding. Murmurs filled the chamber. Some delegates agreed, others seemed worried. The Vrelon representative, a bird-like creature named Silka, spoke up. The humans were always peaceful. Perhaps they simply want to be left alone. Peaceful species don't cut contact completely, Veltar said. They ask for reduced involvement, not total silence. This behavior suggests something more serious. The debate continued for hours. Finally, Veltar called for a vote, all in favor of sending an investigation fleet to the silent sector. Hands, claws, tentacles, and other appendages rose across the chamber. The motion passed easily. Far from the council chambers on the edge of the silent sector, Captain Juan guided his exploration ship through the empty space between stars. The Star's Edge was a small vessel, designed for long-range scouting and peaceful contact with new species. Juan had been doing this job for 15 years and had never encountered anything he couldn't handle. "Captain," called Lieutenant Nari from her communication station. "I'm picking up some strange readings ahead." Juan moved to look at her screen. The young officer had excellent instincts, and if she thought something was strange, it usually was. "What kind of readings?" "Energy signatures," Nari said, frowning at her instruments. "Big ones. And they're moving in formation." "How big?" Juan asked. "Bigger than anything in our databases. And Captain, there are a lot of them." Juan felt a chill run down his spine. "Can you get a visual?" "Trying now," Nari said, her fingers dancing over her controls. The main screen flickered to life, showing only empty space and distant stars. "I don't see anything," said Engineer Kang from his station near the back of the bridge. "That's what worries me," Nari replied. "The energy readings are definitely there, but we can't see what's causing them." Juan made a decision. "Send a standard greeting message on all frequencies. If there's someone out there, let's try to talk to them." Nari began transmitting. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Juan of the exploration ship Star's Edge. We come in peace and request communication." They waited. The only response was silence. "Try again," Juan ordered. Nari repeated the message, this time in several different languages used by various galactic species. Still nothing. "Captain," Engineer Kang called out, his voice tight with worry. "Our engines just stopped working." Juan spun around. "What do you mean stopped?" "I mean they're completely dead. No power, no response, nothing. It's like someone just switched them off." Before Juan could respond, the lights on the bridge dimmed and then brightened again. When they returned to normal, 3 figures stood on the bridge where moments before there had been empty space. The crew froze in shock. The 3 beings looked human, but something was different about them. They were taller than average, with perfect posture and calm expressions. Their clothes seemed to shift and change in the light, as if made from something that wasn't quite solid. The center figure, A woman with short black hair stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but carried absolute authority. "Captain Juan," she said. "I am Commander Day. We need to talk." Juan found his voice. "How did you get on my ship?" "Our shields were up." "Your shields work against the technology, you understand," Day replied. "We have moved beyond such limitations." "You're human," Lieutenant Nari said, staring in amazement. "We are," confirmed one of Day's companions, a tall man with kind eyes. "Though perhaps not the humans you remember from your history books." Juan felt the deck beneath his feet begin to vibrate differently. Looking out the main screen, he could see that his ship was now inside what appeared to be a massive hangar bay. The walls seemed to bend and flow like liquid metal. "Where are we?" he asked. "Safe," Commander Day said. "Your people sent an investigation fleet into our space. We intercepted it before it could cause problems." "What investigation fleet?" 500 ships from the Galactic Council, the third human said. "They believe we represent a threat." Juan's mind raced. 500 ships was a massive force. The Council only assembled fleets that large when they expected serious resistance. "Do you represent a threat, I mean?" Commander Day smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the humans Juan remembered from old records. "That depends entirely on how one defines threat. To those who seek to control others, yes. To those who simply want to live in peace, no." "We're going to take you somewhere safe while we deal with your fleet," the tall man said. "Don't be afraid. You and your crew will not be harmed." "Deal with them how?" Juan asked. "By showing them that the galaxy has changed," Day replied, "and that humanity has changed with it." As the star's edge was gently drawn deeper into the alien vessel, Juan wondered what had happened to Earth during their long silence. Whatever it was, he suspected the Galactic Council was about to get a very big surprise. The humans had been quiet for 200 years. Somehow Juan didn't think they were planning to stay quiet much longer. 200 years earlier, Ambassador June sat in the same crystal chamber that would later echo with debates about humanity's silence. But on this day, the hall buzzed with excitement rather than worry. Earth had just been invited to join the Galactic Council, and humanity was eager to take its place among the stars. June straightened his formal diplomatic robes as he watched the other delegates file into their seats. He had spent months preparing for this moment, studying galactic law and customs, Earth's first real chance to be part of something bigger than their small blue world. The session began with routine business. Trade agreements between the hegemony and the Kelfian Empire, mining rights in the Outer Rim, standard diplomatic discussions that June found fascinating. This was how civilized species solved their problems, through discussion and compromise. Then, Council leader Zethros brought up what he called an important matter for the newer members. The ancient reptilian being had ruled the Council for over 1,000 years. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "We must discuss the Primitive Species Integration Protocol," Zethros announced. June leaned forward in his seat. This was the first he had heard of this protocol. The briefing materials Earth had received mentioned nothing about it. Secretary Mordak began reading from the proposal. As the words filled the chamber, June felt his stomach grow cold. The protocol wasn't about integration at all. It was about control. All species deemed primitive will be placed under the guidance of more advanced civilizations, Mordak read. This guidance will include the establishment of monitoring stations in their home systems, oversight of their technological development, and approval of all major governmental decisions. The protocol went on to define primitive as any species that had achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 500 years. That included humanity and dozens of other younger civilizations. June raised his hand to speak. "Honored Council Leader, may I ask a question about this protocol?" Zethros looked down at him with cold eyes. "You may. This protocol seems to remove the sovereignty of younger species. How is this different from conquest?" A ripple of uncomfortable sounds went through the chamber. Some delegates shifted in their seats. Others stared at June with expressions he couldn't read. "Young species often lack the wisdom to govern themselves properly," Zethros replied. "History shows us that primitive civilizations left alone tend to destroy themselves or become threats to galactic stability. This protocol prevents such problems." "But who decides what constitutes a threat?" June asked, standing up now. "And who gave the Council the right to override the will of sovereign peoples?" The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Veltar, younger then but already ambitious, spoke up. Ambassador June, surely you understand that the greater good sometimes requires difficult decisions. The greater good? June's voice rose despite his training in diplomatic calm. Or the greater convenience of those already in power? Zethros slammed his massive fist on his podium. You forget yourself, human. Your species has barely left its home system. You have no understanding of the complexities of galactic civilization. I understand enough to recognize tyranny when I see it, June replied. The debate that followed was heated, but brief. When the vote was called, the protocol passed by an overwhelming margin. Only 3 species voted against it, 2 other young civilizations and the Vrilon, who abstained from most political votes. As the session ended, Zethros turned to June. The monitoring stations around Earth will be established within 6 months. I suggest you prepare your people for the transition. June stood slowly, his mind racing. Around him, delegates began filing out, most avoiding his eyes. A few of the younger species representatives looked as shocked as he felt. That night, June sent an encrypted message to Earth. The response came back within hours. Earth's government was united in their decision. The next day, June returned to the council chamber for what would be his final appearance. He wore his formal robes, but this time they felt like a costume for a play he no longer wanted to be part of. Council leader Zethros, he said, standing as the session began. I have a message from the government of Earth. Speak, Zethros commanded. Earth hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We came seeking friendship among equals. Instead, we found masters seeking servants. We will not be returning. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted questions and demands. Zethros roared for order. You cannot simply leave, Veltar called out. The protocol has been approved. The monitoring stations will be established regardless. June smiled for the first time since arriving at the council. You are welcome to try. 200 years later, Captain Juan found himself walking through corridors that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his mind could process. Commander Day led him through the human vessel, past rooms where the walls showed stars that weren't visible from their current location, and chambers where gravity seemed to flow like water. What happened to you? Juan asked. To humanity, I mean. Our records show that Earth simply went silent after leaving the Council. We learned, Day said simply. When the Council fleet arrived to establish their monitoring stations, they found something they didn't expect. What? Empty space. We had moved Earth. Juan stopped walking. That's impossible. Planets can't be moved. Not with Council technology, agreed one of Day's companions, a man named Kyo. But we found teachers who understood the universe differently. They entered a vast chamber where the ceiling showed what looked like a map of the galaxy, but with strange patterns of light flowing between the stars. Dee gestured to the display. After we left the Council, we began receiving visitors, not the kind your databases would recognize. Ancient species that had transcended physical existence millennia ago. They were curious about a young race that had refused easy power. The architects, Kyo added, the first builders, civilizations that had learned to exist beyond the normal rules of space and time. They taught you? Juan asked. They shared knowledge with those willing to earn it, Day corrected. We spent 2 centuries learning not just technology but wisdom. How to exist without needing to dominate. How to grow without needing to conquer. Juan looked at the star map again. Now he could see that some of the light patterns connected to systems he recognized. You've been watching us. All of us. We've been learning, Day said. Understanding how the galaxy has changed. And we've been contacted by others who grew tired of the Council's rule. The implications hit Juan like a physical blow. That's why you intercepted the investigation fleet. That's part of it, Kyo said. But the larger reason is simpler. The Council has decided to test our defenses. They want to know if we've become a threat. Have you? Juan asked. Commander Day looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than her apparent age. To a system built on dominance and fear? Yes. We represent something they can't control or understand. That makes us very dangerous indeed. Outside the ship, Juan knew, 500 Council warships waited for humanity's response to their demands. He was beginning to understand that they might not like what they received. Admiral Kothmir stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. 500 warships spread out in perfect formation around him, representing the combined military might of dozens of galactic civilizations. It was the largest fleet assembled in over 3 centuries. "Status report," he commanded. "All ships report ready for combat operations," replied his tactical officer, a efficient hegemony warrior named Bakhtar. "We have enough firepower to crack a planet." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Kothmir said, though he doubted the humans would be reasonable. 200 years of silence suggested they were planning something dangerous. "Any response to our communications?" "Nothing yet, Admiral. We've been broadcasting surrender demands on all frequencies for 6 hours. Kothmir nodded. Standard procedure when dealing with potentially hostile forces was to give them every chance to surrender peacefully. The Council might be many things, but they weren't monsters. Usually. "Sir," called out the sensor operator, a young Kelfian named Silwen. "I'm reading something strange." "Define strange." "Energy signatures appearing throughout the fleet formation. Big ones." Kothmir felt his blood chill. "How big?" "Larger than our capital ships, sir. And they're everywhere." On the main display, space began to shimmer. Then, as if reality itself was being unwrapped, ships began appearing around the Council fleet. "Not dozens of ships. Not hundreds. Thousands." "Count them," Kothmir ordered, his voice steady despite the shock. Silwen's voice was barely a whisper. 1,000 ships confirmed, sir. All of unknown design. The human vessels were unlike anything in Kothmir's experience. They seemed to be made of flowing metal and light, their surfaces shifting and changing as he watched. Some appeared to be solid, others looked partially transparent. A few seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Hurting his eyes to look at directly. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer. "Put it through." The face that appeared on the screen was unmistakably human, but like the humans Captain Juan had encountered, this one seemed somehow more than the historical records suggested humans could be. The man wore no visible uniform but carried himself with absolute authority. "I am Fleet Admiral Hyun of the Human Defense Force. You are trespassing in sovereign space. Withdraw immediately." Kothmir had commanded fleets for over a century. He had faced down pirates, rebels, and rogue nations. He was not intimidated by a single human, regardless of how many ships they had managed to gather. "I am Admiral Kothmir of the Galactic Council Defense Force. By order of the Council, you will stand down and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Your long isolation ends today." Admiral Hyun's expression didn't change. "Admiral, you have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal. This is not a negotiation." "You're outnumbered 5-1, Kothmir replied. "I suggest you reconsider your position." "Mathematics assumes equal capabilities," Hyun said calmly. "That assumption is incorrect." The transmission ended. Kothmir turned to his tactical officer. "Bakhtar, target their command ship. All vessels prepare to—" He never finished the sentence. One moment half of his fleet was there. The next moment they simply weren't. "Sir," Silwen's voice cracked with stress. 250 ships have vanished from sensors. No weapon discharge detected. No energy signatures. They're just gone." "Gone where?" "Unknown, sir. It's like they never existed." Then, as suddenly as they had vanished, the missing ships reappeared. But something was wrong. Their engines were dead, their weapons powered down, their communication systems silent. "This is Admiral Kothmir to all vessels," he broadcast. "Report status immediately." The responses came in slowly. Ship after ship reported the same thing. They had found themselves in a place that wasn't quite space and wasn't quite anything else. A gray void where time seemed to move differently. Then they were back, but their weapons wouldn't function and their engines barely responded to commands. Admiral Hyun's face appeared on the screen again. "You have been given a demonstration of our capabilities. Your weapons are temporarily disabled, but your life support and basic systems remain functional. You can leave anytime you choose." "What did you do to my ships?" Kothmir demanded. "We moved them somewhere else for a moment," Hyun replied casually. "Think of it as a timeout. Your species seem to understand concepts better when they experience them directly." "This is impossible. No technology can simply displace matter through space without massive energy expenditure." "No technology that you understand," Hyun corrected. "We have learned from teachers who view the universe very differently than you do." Kothmir looked around his bridge. His crew stared at their instruments in confusion and fear. Everything they understood about physics and warfare had just been proven wrong. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "We want to be left alone," Hyun said. But since the Council has decided that's not an option, we're going to have a conversation instead. What kind of conversation? The kind that should have happened 200 years ago. We're going to the Council chambers. The Council will listen, Hyun interrupted, because they no longer have a choice in the matter. On Earth, President Sue stood in a room that existed in the space between dimensions, watching the feed from Admiral Hyun's ship. Around her, humanity's leadership debated their next moves. The chamber itself was a gift from their teachers, a place where thought could become reality and distance had no meaning. The fleet is secure, reported General Tay, a man whose body flickered between solid and energy. No casualties on either side. Good, Sue said. We're not interested in being conquerors, but it's time the galaxy understood that we're no longer the species they can push around. Defense Minister No materialized beside her, his form shifting from human to something that looked like living starlight. The Council is already calling emergency sessions. They're terrified. They should be, said Dr. On, the head of Humanities Science Division. Her research into dimensional mechanics had been instrumental in humanity's transformation. Not of us, but of what we represent. A universe where their way of doing things is no longer the only option. President Sue nodded. For 2 centuries, humanity had grown and learned in isolation. They had made contact with beings that existed beyond normal space and time, learned technologies that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolutes, and most importantly, developed a philosophy that valued cooperation over domination. Begin the journey to the Council chambers, she ordered. It's time we reminded the galaxy what they lost when they chose fear over friendship. Admiral Hyun received the order and smiled. Around him, 1,000 human ships began moving through space, in ways that defied everything the Council fleet thought they knew about travel. Between the stars, some ships simply folded space around themselves and stepped sideways through dimensions. Others became pure energy and flowed along the galaxy's magnetic fields. A few seemed to exist in multiple places at once, their presence felt rather than seen. The message to the galaxy was clear. Humanity had returned, and they were no longer the primitive species that could be bullied into submission. The question now was whether the Galactic Council was wise enough to listen to what they had to say. News of the human fleet's display of power spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours of Admiral Kothmir's first report, every major civilization knew that the species they had dismissed as primitive 2 centuries ago had returned with capabilities that defied understanding. In the crystal halls of the Galactic Council, emergency sessions ran around the clock. Ambassador Veltar found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to maintain order while his own worldview crumbled around him. The reports must be exaggerated, insisted Counselor Rakthon of the military. Cast. No species can simply make ships disappear and reappear at will. 500 independent. Sensor logs say otherwise, replied Intelligence Director Morkan, spreading holographic displays across the chamber floor. The humans didn't just disable our fleet. They demonstrated technology that operates outside known physics. Veltar studied the recordings for the 100th time. Ships vanishing without energy discharges, matter being displaced without obvious means, weapon systems failing not through jamming or interference, but through what appeared to be selective reality alteration. What do our scientists say? He asked. They say it's impossible, Dr. Velkris responded from her position at the research station. But then they start talking about theoretical frameworks involving dimensional manipulation and space-time folding that exist only in our most advanced mathematics. Theoretical, emphasized Counselor Rakthon, meaning not real. Meaning we couldn't build it, Dr. Velkris corrected. That doesn't mean it can't exist. The debate had been raging for days. Half the Council wanted to mobilize every ship in the galaxy for a preemptive strike against humanity. The other half argued for immediate diplomatic contact. A growing third faction suggested simply leaving human space alone and hoping the problem would go away. We cannot ignore this threat, Ambassador Corthan rumbled from his massive chair. A species that can disable our fleets without firing a shot could conquer the galaxy whenever they choose. Could they? Asked Silka of the Vrillon. The bird-like delegate had remained quiet through most of the discussions, but now her voice carried a note of curiosity. If they wanted conquest, why disable our weapons instead of destroying our ships? Why give Admiral Kothmir the option to withdraw? Psychological warfare, Rakthon replied immediately. Make us afraid so we surrender without a fight. Or, Silka continued, they genuinely have no interest in conquest and are trying to minimize casualties while making their point. Veltar felt a headache building behind his eyes. What point would that be? That they're no longer the weak species we can push around, said a new voice from the chamber entrance. Every head turned to see who had spoken. Standing in the doorway was someone who shouldn't have been able to enter the chamber at all. The council chambers were protected by layers of security that would stop any unauthorized person long before they reached the main hall. The figure was humanoid, but somehow more than human. Captain Juan walked beside the being, looking both awed and terrified. I am Commander Day of the Human Diplomatic Corps, the figure said, stepping into the chamber with perfect confidence. Captain Juan has agreed to serve as a neutral witness to our conversation. How did you get in here? Veltar demanded. This facility is secure. Security assumes your understanding of space and matter is correct, Day replied calmly. We have learned that such assumptions are often limiting. Alarms began sounding throughout the building. Security forces rushed toward the chamber, only to find themselves unable to enter. They could see through the doorway, but attempting to step through resulted in them walking in place, as if the entrance had become an infinite corridor. Please, Day said, raising one hand. We're here to talk, not to fight. The alarm stopped. The security forces found they could move normally again, though they remained positioned outside the chamber. What do you want? Veltar asked. To understand why you sent a fleet to our space, Day replied, and to explain why that was a mistake. Intelligence Director Morkan leaned forward. Our reports indicate you've been expanding your territory. Peaceful species don't need to hide from galactic observation. We weren't hiding, Day said patiently. We were learning. And yes, our territory has grown, but not through conquest. She gestured, and a holographic map of the galaxy appeared in the center of the chamber. Dozens of star systems glowed with soft light. These worlds have asked to join us, Day explained. Species that grew tired of council taxation without representation. Civilizations that wanted to develop their own cultures without oversight from distant bureaucrats. Peoples who remembered what it was like before the council decided their way was the only way. Councilor Rakthon stood up, his massive frame towering over the assembled delegates. Those worlds belong to the council. They have no right to leave. According to what law? Captain Juan asked, surprising everyone, including himself. I've been reading the original council charter during my stay with the humans. Nowhere does it say that membership is permanent or that worlds cannot choose their own governments. The law of stability, Veltar replied. If worlds can simply leave whenever they disagree with council decisions, the entire galactic civilization will collapse. Will it? Day asked. Or will it evolve into something better? She gestured again and the holographic display changed. Now it showed trade routes, communication networks, and cultural exchanges between the systems that had joined humanity's confederation. These worlds are more prosperous now than they ever were under council rule, Day continued. They trade freely, develop their own technologies, and solve their disputes through mediation rather than threat of force. Mediation by whom? Dr. Velkris asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. By beings who have no stake in the outcome, Day replied. Our teachers from beyond normal space and time. Entities that achieved transcendence so long ago that material concerns no longer matter to them. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate stared at Commander Day, trying to process what she had just said. You're claiming to have contact with transcendent beings? Veltar asked. Not claiming, Day said. Demonstrating. The air in the chamber began to shimmer. Slowly, forms began to materialize. Beings of pure energy. Entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and shapes that hurt to look at directly because they existed in more than 3 dimensions. We are the architects, spoke a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. We have watched this galaxy grow for millions of years. Rarely have we seen a species reject easy power in favor of difficult wisdom. Humanity intrigued us. They chose to learn rather than conquer, added another voice, this one seeming to come from inside the delegates' minds, to grow rather than dominate. Such species are rare and precious. The transcendent beings faded back into invisibility, but their presence could still be felt. This is impossible, whispered Dr. Velkris. This is evolution, Day corrected. The universe is vast and full of wonders. The Council has spent millennia trying to control a tiny corner of it, while remaining ignorant of its true nature. What do you want from us? Veltar asked again. Nothing, Day replied. We want to offer you something instead, which is a choice. Continue trying to rule through fear and force, or join us in building something better. A true confederation of equals where no species holds power over another. Outside the chamber, Admiral Hyun's fleet waited in space that wasn't quite space, ready to return to normal reality whenever they chose. On Earth, President Su monitored the diplomatic contact while preparing for whatever decision the Council would make. Captain Huan looked around the chamber at faces that showed fear, confusion, anger, and in a few cases hope. He realized he was witnessing one of those moments when history turned on a single choice. The question was, would the Galactic Council be wise enough to choose correctly? 3 days after Commander Day's appearance in the Council chambers, Admiral Hyun's fleet materialized in the space around the Council station. But these were not the same 1,000 ships that had confronted Admiral Kothmir. Some vessels now carried beings of pure energy that had once been human, but had chosen to transcend physical form. Others transported quantum entities that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. The flagship itself seemed to phase in and out of normal space, carrying diplomats from dimensions that most species couldn't even imagine. Admiral Hyun stood on his bridge, wearing simple clothes that somehow managed to command more respect than any uniform ever could. Beside him, beings that had evolved beyond the need for physical bodies flickered in and out of visibility as they prepared for the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history. All ships report ready, announced Captain One from her position at the tactical station. The delegation is prepared for transport. Very well, Hyun replied. Let's see if the Council has spent the last 3 days learning or just arguing. In the Council chambers, the debate had indeed been intense. For 72 hours straight, delegates had argued about humanity's proposal to dissolve the current galactic government and replace it with what they called a true confederation of equals. Ambassador Veltar looked exhausted as he called the session to order. The chamber was packed not just with regular delegates, but with military commanders, scientific advisors, and representatives from worlds that rarely bothered with council politics. The human delegation has requested permission to address the full council, Veltar announced. Given their demonstrated capabilities, I see no practical way to refuse this request. We could fight, growled Councillor Rakthon, though his voice lacked the conviction it had held days earlier. Gather every ship in the galaxy and watch them disappear one by one, interrupted Intelligence Director Morkan. Our analysis suggests the humans could disable every military vessel we possess without harming a single person aboard them. How exactly do you fight an enemy that can make your weapons simply stop working? Before anyone could respond, the air in the center of the chamber began to shimmer. Admiral Hyun appeared first, followed by a delegation that made every previous diplomatic meeting look simple by comparison. Commander Day stood beside Hyun, but now she was accompanied by beings that challenged every assumption about what life could become. A woman who appeared to be made of starlight introduced herself as Dr. An, head of humanity's dimensional research. A man whose body flickered between matter and energy was General Tay, representing humanity's defense forces. But it was the other figures that truly shocked the assembled delegates. Beings of pure thought that communicated through shared consciousness, quantum entities that existed in multiple realities simultaneously, and towering above them all, barely visible to normal senses, the architects themselves. Honored delegates, Admiral Hyun began, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. We come to you today not as conquerors, but as neighbors who have learned that the universe is far larger and more wonderful than any of us imagined. You speak of wonders while threatening our entire civilization, Ambassador Veltar replied. How are we supposed to respond to that? By recognizing that your civilization is built on a foundation of fear, Dr. An said, her starlight form pulsing gently. Fear of losing control, fear of change, fear of admitting that there might be better ways to organize galactic society. General Tay stepped forward, his form solidifying into something more traditionally human. 200 years ago, Ambassador June stood in this chamber and asked a simple question. Who gave the Council the right to rule over sovereign peoples? You never answered that question. We answered it with force, Councillor Rakthon rumbled. The same way all such questions are ultimately answered. And how did that work out? Admiral Hyun asked mildly. You sent monitoring stations to Earth. What did you find? Rakthon's expression darkened. Everyone in the chamber knew the answer. The Council's monitoring fleet had found empty space where Earth should have been. No trace of the planet or its star system, just a void that their instruments couldn't explain. Where did you go? Whispered Dr. Velcris. Everywhere, replied one of the energy beings. Nowhere. We learned to exist in the spaces between dimensions while we studied with teachers who had transcended the need for fixed locations. Commander Day moved to the center of the chamber, but we're not here to discuss our past. We're here to offer you a future. She gestured, and a new holographic display filled the chamber. This one showed not star maps or trade routes, but something far more complex. A vision of galactic civilization reorganized around cooperation rather than control. No more central authority dictating terms to independent worlds, Day explained. No more taxation without representation. No more military fleets enforcing the will of distant bureaucrats on peoples who never asked for their interference. Chaos, Veltar said immediately. Without central authority, every dispute will become a war. Will it? Asked one of the architects, their voice resonating through dimensions most delegates couldn't perceive. We have mediated conflicts for millions of years. Disputes resolved through understanding rather than force tend to stay resolved. And who asks for your mediation? Intelligence Director Morkan asked. Anyone who chooses to, Dr. An replied. That's the key word, choose. No species is forced to accept our guidance. No world is compelled to join our confederation. No people are told how to live their lives by others who have never walked in their shoes. Admiral Hyun moved to stand directly before Ambassador Veltar. We're not asking you to trust us. We're asking you to trust yourselves. To believe that intelligent species can find ways to coexist without needing masters and servants. The chamber erupted in voices as delegates began arguing among themselves. Some called for immediate acceptance of the human proposal. Others demanded military resistance despite its obvious futility. A few simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they were hearing. Through it all, the human delegation waited patiently. They had learned patience during their 2 centuries of growth, and they understood that fundamental change could not be rushed. Finally, Veltar called for order. You're asking us to abandon everything we've built, everything that has maintained galactic stability for thousands of years. We're asking you to evolve, General Tay replied. The galaxy has grown beyond the system you built. The choice is simple, grow with it or be left behind. And if we refuse? Rakthon asked. Admiral Hyun's expression remained calm. Then you refuse. We won't force change on anyone. But understand that the worlds that have already joined us will not be returning to Council authority, and others will continue to leave as they see what true freedom looks like. Captain Huan, who had been standing quietly to one side, suddenly spoke up. May I address the Council? Veltar looked surprised but nodded. I've spent weeks with these humans, Huan said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I've seen their cities, met their people, and studied their technology. They're not trying to conquer anyone. They're trying to show us what we could become if we stopped being afraid of each other. He paused, looking around at faces that had known only the Council's way of doing things for their entire lives. The universe is vast beyond imagination, Huan continued. There are beings out there who achieved transcendence before our species even existed. There are forms of life and consciousness that we can't even comprehend. And we've been sitting here for millennia, arguing about who gets to control a few hundred worlds in one small corner of one galaxy. The chamber fell silent. Even the architects seemed to pause in their eternal contemplation. The humans aren't offering to rule us, Huan concluded. They're offering to teach us how to rule ourselves. The question is, are we brave enough to learn? The vote, when it finally came, was not unanimous. It never could have been. Too many species had too much invested in the old ways. But it was decisive enough 1 year later. Captain Huan stood in a new chamber that existed in the space between dimensions, watching as representatives from across the galaxy met to discuss issues that affected them all. There were no threats here, no ultimate authorities, no forced compliance. There were only beings who had chosen to work together, mediated by entities ancient beyond measure, and guided by the simple principle that every species deserved the right to determine its own destiny. The Galactic Council was gone. replaced by something that had no name because it needed none. It was simply what happened when intelligent life chose cooperation over conquest, growth over control, and wisdom over power. Ambassador June's question had finally been answered. No one had given the Council the right to rule over others, and now no one ever would again. In the end, the humans had kept their promise. They had never wanted to rule the galaxy. They had simply wanted to show it what freedom looked like. And the galaxy, after thousands of years of servitude disguised as civilization, had finally learned to be free.